The kingdom of Altheria was a land of endless prosperity, where crops grew tall and rivers sparkled with the reflection of golden spires. But on the night Princess Serenya was born, the skies darkened unnaturally, and a storm unlike any other tore through the kingdom. Lightning cleaved the tallest towers, and the once placid rivers swelled with a sudden fury, sweeping away entire villages. Inside the grand royal chamber, Queen Ilara's cries echoed, mixing with the anguished howls of the storm. The moment Serenya entered the world, her piercing wail silenced the thunder. But it was not a cry of relief, it was a herald of doom. Word spread quickly. The royal seer, a frail woman with cataract-clouded eyes, whispered a prophecy upon seeing the child. "Beware the heart that beats with love, for those cherished by her will be undone. Her path is one of ruin, and her touch shall bring sorrow." The court erupted into chaos. Advisors demanded the newborn be cast out to protect the kingdom. Others, bound by duty, argued that Serenya was still royal blood, and her curse might be controlled or undone. King Haldric, a man of unshakable resolve, silenced them with a single gesture. "This is my daughter," he declared, his voice cold as steel. "Her curse is our burden. We will endure." But deep inside, he feared the prophecy more than he let on. Years passed, and Serenya grew into a striking young woman with fiery red hair and emerald eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. She was intelligent and curious, but her life was confined to the castle walls. Guards and servants avoided her gaze, fearful of becoming victims of her curse. The kingdom whispered her name with both pity and contempt, the Harbinger Princess. Serenya felt the isolation keenly, especially as she noticed how her very presence seemed to invite disaster. A young servant who had once dared to play with her was thrown from his horse and crippled the next day. Her mother, Queen Ilara, fell mysteriously ill after kissing her goodnight. On the eve of her 16th birthday, a grand feast was held, not for her, but to celebrate the kingdom's prosperity. She watched from the shadows of her balcony as nobles and commoners alike danced in the great hall below, their laughter ringing out like bells. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to dream of a life where she could join them, free of her burden. Her musings were interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard. A young knight, tall and defiant, was being dragged in chains before the king. His name was Kale, and he was accused of treason for speaking out against the monarchy. Curiosity drew Serenya closer to the scene. Hidden behind a curtain, she listened as Kale defended himself. "Your kingdom thrives while its people suffer in silence," he shouted, his voice raw with conviction. "The Cursed Princess hoards the wealth of this land, while villages starve under her shadow." The words stung more than any blow, but they ignited something within her, a spark of rebellion. That night, unable to sleep, Serenya sneaked into the dungeons. She found Kale sitting in the dim torchlight, his wrists chained but his spirit unbroken. He glanced up, his piercing gaze meeting hers. For the first time in years, someone looked at her not with fear, but with anger. "Come to gloat?" he asked bitterly. "No," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "I came to understand why you hate me." Kale's laugh was harsh. "Hate you? I pity you. The great Harbinger Princess, trapped in her golden cage, while the world burns for her." His words cut deep, but they also resonated with a truth she could not deny. She leaned closer, her voice trembling. "If you pity me, then help me. Tell me how I can make this right." Kale stared at her, stunned by her vulnerability. "You can't," he said finally. "You're a curse. You're beyond saving." "Then why do I feel that you might be the first person to ever truly see me?" she whispered. The tension between them was electric, but it was also dangerous. Serenya knew she had to leave, but as she turned to go, Kale called after her. "You want to make things right? Then start by escaping this palace and seeing the world you've ruined." As dawn broke, Serenya stood on her balcony, her mind racing. Kale's words haunted her. She had spent her entire life trapped in the safety of the castle, shielded from the world. But what if the only way to break her curse was to confront it head-on? Her heart pounded as she made her decision. For the first time in her life, Serenya would defy her father's will. She would leave the castle, find Kale, and together, they would uncover the truth behind her curse. As Serenya packed a small satchel, a shadow moved behind her. She spun around, startled, to find her closest handmaid, Lyra, watching her with wide eyes. "You're leaving," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "If the king finds out, then he'll lock me away forever," Serenya said. "I have no choice." Lyra hesitated, then stepped forward. "Take me with you," she said. Serenya froze. "Why would you risk that?" Lyra's eyes glistened with tears. "Because the kingdom isn't the only one suffering. And because," she paused, then lowered her voice, "you're not the only one with secrets." The moon hung low over the castle as Serenya and Lyra crept through the empty halls, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. They had chosen a narrow servant's passage that led to the stables, avoiding the royal guards. Lyra carried a small lantern, the flickering light casting eerie shadows on the stone walls. "Are you certain about this?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling. "Once we leave, there's no coming back." "I was never truly here," Serenya replied bitterly. "I've been a ghost in my own life." They reached the stables, where Serenya's black mare, Nissa, waited. The horse neighed softly as Serenya stroked her muzzle. They packed light, only essentials. As they prepared to ride, Lyra hesitated again, looking over her shoulder toward the castle. "What secrets are you keeping, Lyra?" Serenya asked sharply, her emerald eyes narrowing. Lyra shook her head. "Not now. Not here." The tension between them hung heavy, but there was no time to press further. The castle bells might ring at any moment, signaling their absence. The gates to the outer city were guarded, so they rode toward the forest, a place thick with ancient trees and darker rumors. The people called it the Shadewood, a land where light rarely touched the ground and where spirits of the cursed were said to linger. As they crossed the threshold, Lyra shuddered visibly. "The Shadewood is forbidden for a reason," she murmured. "So am I," Serenya replied, spurring Nissa onward. Meanwhile, in the castle dungeon, Kale sat shackled to the wall. The iron chains were cold, but his fury burned hotter. He had spent the night replaying his encounter with the princess, the vulnerability in her voice, the defiance in her eyes. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. 2 guards entered, followed by the imposing figure of King Haldrick. "You will help me track my daughter," the king demanded, his voice like thunder. Kale smirked despite his predicament. "And why would I do that?" The king leaned in closer, his face set in a grim mask. "Because if you don't, I'll ensure you never speak another word of treason. And because you seem to have a way with my daughter. She trusts you. Use that." Kale's smirk faltered. "What happens if I bring her back?" "That's none of your concern," the king replied, his tone ice cold. Kale's mind raced. Helping the king would mean betraying Serenya, but refusing might cost him his life. "Fine," he said finally. "But when I find her, I make the decisions." The king nodded, but his piercing gaze said otherwise. In the Shadewood, Serenya and Lyra faced their first true test. The forest was alive with unnatural sounds. Branches creaked as though whispering, and the air was thick with a cold that seeped into their bones. The path ahead twisted and turned, often disappearing entirely. "Why here?" Lyra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because no one will follow us into this place," Serenya replied. "Not even my father." As they ventured deeper, Serenya began to feel a strange pull, as if the forest itself were drawing her forward. She brushed it off at first, but soon, the sensation grew stronger. "Something isn't right," Lyra muttered, clutching her lantern tightly. "I know," Serenya said, her voice quiet. "But I think it's leading me somewhere." They arrived at a clearing, where an ancient, crumbling shrine stood. It was unlike anything Serenya had seen before, with carvings that glowed faintly in the darkness. Lyra hesitated, but Serenya approached the shrine, feeling an inexplicable connection. As she touched one of the carvings, a figure emerged from the shadows. A woman cloaked in tattered robes, her face obscured by a hood. "Who dares disturb this place?" the woman demanded, her voice echoing unnaturally. "We seek answers," Serenya replied, her heart pounding. "About a curse." The woman stepped closer, and Serenya caught a glimpse of her eyes. pale and otherworldly. "You bear the mark of misfortune," the woman said, her tone laced with both pity and disdain. "But curses are not born, they are given." "What does that mean?" Serenya asked, her voice trembling. The woman turned away. "The answers you seek lie beyond the forest, in the ruins of Eltharion. But be warned, the truth will demand more of you than you are prepared to give." Before Serenya could ask more, the woman vanished into the shadows. As they left the shrine, Lyra spoke up. "This is madness, Serenya. Eltharion is a place of death. Whatever truth you find there will only bring more pain. And what if it's the key to ending my curse?" Serenya countered. "What if it's my only chance?" Lyra fell silent, but her expression betrayed her fear. Unbeknownst to them, Kale had entered the forest, his footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. He watched from a distance, his heart torn between duty and the strange sense of understanding he felt for the Cursed Princess. As Serenya and Lyra prepared to camp for the night, the sounds of the forest grew louder, branches snapping, leaves rustling. Serenya reached for the dagger hidden in her cloak, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Do you hear that?" Lyra whispered, her voice shaking. Before Serenya could respond, a shadow lunged from the trees. A monstrous creature with glowing eyes and jagged claws charged toward them. Serenya barely had time to raise her weapon. "Run!" she screamed to Lyra.